I will quickly just jump in with a separate announcement, which is the campus, to be clear, is open to the public. Those of you who see things about museum tickets being sold out, that does not mean you cannot go to the campus. It means you can't get into the museum. I see a lot of confusion about this, so to be clear, again, the campus is open to the public. The part you will have trouble getting into is the big tower, which we'll talk more about. So that's my announcement for the day. Of course, it is an honor to be back amongst nerds of the civic variety. I do love to just get a sense of who I'm talking to here, so we're going to do like a quick poll, if you'll bear with me. If you could raise your hand if you are a technologist of some kind, product engineer, data, got it, okay. And raise your hand if you are just a hobbyist or here for fun just to hear me talk. Great, love. Okay, cool. Well, I'm here purportedly to talk to you about software, and this, I will talk to you a little bit about software, but this is not really just a talk about software, but rather about the principles and intentions that guide enduring technology in something like a physical building. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, not just as an engineer at the Presidential Center, but also just as a human, is the Constitution. And it's something I've been thinking about, and this will all tie together, but if you could just, once again, humor me. Suppose I showed you this, and I asked you, which one of these is the Constitution? Suppose I had the original parchment, I gave you Braille, I gave you a pocket edition, or any number of variety of options. Which one of those is the Constitution? Shout it out. I heard the original and I heard all of them. So yes, right, and the answer is, of course, that they're all a representation. And that's really what this talk is going to be about. Because while the founders couldn't have known this at the time, the Constitution is a technology. And it is perhaps the most enduring technology used not just here in the United States, but all over the world as the dominant form of institutional governance, not just here, but Greece, Japan, Brazil, Jamaica, Spain, and other places. And all of that happens, this enduring, robust technology that lasts generations, all that happens without a single line of code. And that would seem irrelevant, except that it's not. Hi, I'm Diana. I started at the Obama Presidential Center, in 2021. It looked a little bit like this not that long ago. It looks like this now. We've come a long way. You can use this building. Oh, Phil, thank you. Thank you so much. You can use this building in the back as like scale for what you're looking at. It's not a perfect duplicate of the angle. And at the start of this project, we were presented with a set of problems to solve. And the solution to that set of problems for the first part has to be inside this building, importantly, but the problem can't be in the cloud, the solution can't be in the cloud, rather, but that problem looks something like this is a cross-section of the museum tower. Most of the exhibits live on floors 2 through 5. Now, the exhibits sit across several floors, and the product problem is not all that complicated. Exhibits will change. Right? This is intended to last much longer than just right now. The exhibits will change. Artifacts inside the museum will rotate. Visitor behavior, what people choose to do when they enter specific spaces, that will evolve. And perhaps most importantly, being part of an institution that carries the Obama name brings with it some expectations of trust and quality. And so we, as technologists in this space, have to be consider ourselves stewards of that trust. And then there are, of course, just like table stakes stuff, for example, accessibility, and I say that as table stakes recognizing that it isn't always considered table stakes. For us, it absolutely is. Reliability, offline readiness, DevSecOps, all the boring stuff that you do in CI. Now, and make no mistake, these can be challenging problems. But most of these are problems that in one way or another software has to be able to do anyway, right? And so the actual problem that we have to solve is a different one entirely. So let's walk through it. Within the museum, there are several different types of media and types of experiences. The first one we're not going to talk a whole lot about, not because it doesn't take an immense amount of time and effort to produce videos like this, add sign language and captioning and audio descriptions, but from a software standpoint, this is not that interesting. The one exception happens when we talk about audio signals, so we'll talk about that. For the vast majority of the rest of this presentation, I'm going to ignore linear media, but that's what I'm referring to. Second, throughout the museum, we have tactile stations. Tactile stations are intended to allow, and we'll talk more about this device in a minute, tactile stations are intended to allow visitors to get a physical hand to manhandle, effectively, replicas of artifacts. And that's intentional because it allows people not only to kind of get a tactile sense of it, but it also provides tools for our friends with lower vision who maybe can't necessarily get as good a picture of those artifacts when they're inside display cases. Excuse me. Perhaps the most obvious software overlap here is that we also have interactive media installations. You'll see it on that screen and that the buttons behind up here. That is also a screen. This is the story booth experience. This is what you're probably thinking when I tell you we're building museum exhibits. If your brain doesn't go there, you might be in the minority. There are a couple other important parts of this architecture. One is what we refer to as the universal experience point. You will see this all over the museum, and you will see this all over this slide deck. This is an accessibility device that was developed by our incredible partners at Prime Access Consulting. And its primary job is to serve as an assistive technology. Now, part of what we're going to talk about today is how we build a system that allows us to use something like this. But it becomes a consequential part of the architectural decisions that we make when we decide that incorporating a tool like this is going to be central to how we think about what an exhibit experience is. Now, for those of you who are unclear, so to be clear, what we're looking at here is a box. This is a keypad, a directional pad. We'll talk more about exactly how those are used, and this is a headphone jack. Now, that's all I'm going to talk about for right now. We'll talk more about this, but it becomes a non-critical piece, an instrumental piece of the architecture. And then lastly, again, and this is, nope. Hello? There we go. And lastly, the other piece, and we won't talk about linear media installations, but we will talk about audio signals. Because audio signals become I mentioned that this can't be done in the cloud. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of those reasons is that signals, including audio signals, take time to get to places. And so I want you to picture the last time you were sitting in, for example, a movie theater or an immersive room. And I want you to envision somebody playing the exact same piece of audio or same piece of video a couple feet from you, but they're like 2 frames behind you. We had that experience, you get this like slight echo. When signals take time to get to places, particularly when we're talking about audio signals, the latency involved in going up to the cloud and back down can create actually like noticeable and detectable delays in the transmissions of those audio signals. So that is why it becomes an important part of what we're talking about here. With me so far? Amazing. So all of these represent, these are the 4 we're going to focus on today. They all represent devices that live inside the museum. There are many of them. There are over 100 devices inside the museum. All of them are standalone devices. So to be clear, the only connection between, the only connection between these things are that they share a network. Excuse me, that's it. So starting at the top, we talked about tactile stations. To give you a little bit of a better sense of what we're talking about, this is a tactile of, I believe it is the healthcare bill, and this tactile is intended to represent the size of the stack for passing the bill associated with healthcare.gov. And what's happening on this, here, let me give you a better, there we go, to give you a better top-rated tactile description of if you can't see that device, put your hand up on the top left, move it over to the right, and you're going to feel, for example, the president's signature, right? And so that's what we mean when we talk about tactile stations. Whoops. We see these UXPs also next to interactive media stations. Now, this is a child who you might notice is pressing these buttons, which are these buttons, and he's using it to navigate what's on the screen. Right? And we'll do a more practical example of what that looks like, but the astute among you might realize that we are no longer just talking about content, but we are also talking about a shared communication framework. And that's going to be the premise of what we're going to talk about for the rest of this talk. There are also some examples of UXPs that do not have either a screen or a tactile. This is an example of a sonification of an infographic of the 2008 financial crisis. And the job of the UXP device here is to present a sonified version of the way this line moves. Because if you are somebody who doesn't have high contrast vision, then saying there's a line that represents, it's going down, and it represents the 2008 financial crisis, that is not what we would refer to as a parody of information. So instead what we do here is we effectively start at a high pitch, and we say the graph is effectively, I'm not going to pretend to sing, but I'm so sorry to those of you on the stream, but we're going to like play the sounds that represent this, right? And so accessibility becomes baked in here. You're not going to find a separate slide about accessibility because you'll see that this is kind of central to how we're thinking about what the museum architecture needs to be. You may also be getting the sense that there are a lot of moving pieces to this, okay? Now, the UXPs, depending on what experience we're talking about, usually carry some form of audio. Some stations may or may not. But what we know, and what we knew at the beginning, was that the operation of a singular exhibit relies on some combination of traffic and shared contract between all four of these devices, and it becomes a matter of configuration. Are you still with me? Excellent. So in turn, it soon becomes clear that the real work, the real software work involved in standing up a museum lives lives there, right? At the intersection of these independent devices that are expected to coordinate and deliver a unified visitor experience. Now, okay, so how do we solve this problem? To be clear, we were not alone in this. We worked with several people. I'm going to present this as a way we solved the problem, but it was a large group effort. So let's think through this conceptually. If we were trying to figure out what an exhibit is, we can ask questions like, what story are we telling? What media helps tell that story? How can different visitors experience it faithfully, whether you have high vision, low vision? How can visitors navigate through the experience? And what context, this becomes particularly important in the museum setting, what context or physical cues in the environment are related to what you're experiencing, the experience that you're getting as a visitor. So before we continue, I'm going to give you I'm going to confess something to you, which is that this is the first time I've ever built software for a physical space. I didn't know a lot about that, but in coordination with a lot of our partners, what I do know, I've been a software developer and a web developer for over a decade. So we leaned a lot on the technologies that I suspect a lot of you are familiar with. We think of, this is the Obama.org website, and we think of HTML as being a tool for browsers. But it isn't really, right? Browsers are just interpreters. Screen readers interpret the HTML. Search engines interpret it. AI now interprets it. Translation software interprets it. A browser isn't meant to give you a pixel by pixel experience. It's meant to interpret a shared syntactical and semantic structure that can then be interpreted by all kinds of devices. So on the web, the intention is the architecture. The bones of an HTML page really just has a set of nodes, right? A set of nodes, rules, and attributes that tell us how to handle each one of these nodes inside of a web development application. Each interpreter applies its own set of rules for how to handle parts of that experience. That's what a browser is. So if we take that same idea, we've got these nodes that interpreters will help understand, we've got these nodes that we will present in some kind of standardized way that each individual client or interpreter can interpret in the way that we need to deliver that version of the exhibit experience. So we can take that same structure and those questions that I asked you earlier. How do we define what an exhibit is? We can say, all right, what story are we telling? An exhibit has a narrative. What media helped tell that story? Well, an exhibit has to have media, usually. How do different visitors experience it faithfully? There might be more than one way to consume a story or a set of stories. So what journey options do we have? How do you just navigate through the experience? We can borrow directly from HTML syntax in that, right? We can borrow directly from the concept of a semantic navigation unit. And of course, as I mentioned, important in physical environments, what context or physical part of the experience and tactical wayfinding shapes that storytelling? So the idea is fairly similar to how we handle things on the browser. It's ultimately about decoupling meaning from presentation, and that's what HTML does. So we can borrow the battle-tested concepts from the web and try to give the concept of an exhibit the same kind of treatment. Because once you have a definition like this, a sort of shared semantic structure for what an exhibit represents, then you can send different combinations of these elements to different devices that serve as different interfaces to give you a slightly different interpretation on one singular exhibit that you will experience a little bit differently depending on which device you choose. And the reason that we can do this is that once you have a shared set of definitions, every interface is an interpreter. Audio description is an interpretation. Touch screen is an interpretation, a visual interpretation. A tactile station is an interpretation of content that can be navigated, but there is no touchscreen version. The UXP is its own version of an interpreter. I'll show you what this looks like in practice, because I can imagine that this is feeling a bit theoretical. This is an example of the story booth inside the Obama Presidential Center. This is what the screen actually looks like, and I'm going to have you pretend, I'm just going to stand over here actually. I'm going to pretend that I'm a UXP user. And so now this device is sitting next to this experience. I could or could choose not to, I could use that or I could choose not to use that. It doesn't really matter. But for the purpose of this example, I'll show you what it looks like if you do, maybe. Nope. All right, so what happens is I press the down arrow, and there we go. And a focus highlight shows up around the interactive. This device, if I have headphones plugged in, announces heading, share your story. I press the down arrow again. The focus indicator moves. If I have headphones plugged in, I hear the President Mrs. Obama's stories and share your own. I press the down arrow. Focus moved to the next thing on the screen. I hear button, get started. I press the center to activate the button. I go to a new screen. The UXP says window. President or Mrs. Obama will ask you 2 questions. You get the idea here, right? Now there's a separately an additional interesting thing about this, which is that if I fast forward to a different part of the experience, there are several places throughout the museum where this happens, but in the storybook experience, the president is talking to you, so is Mrs. Obama. And there is an audio descriptive track that you can hear if you choose to opt for the accessible tools. And the trick about that is that, so the audio, at the same time, the computer is going to be playing the generic audio track without additional descriptive audio. The headphone jack of that device is going to be playing the audio descriptive track, and those two are going to be synchronized. Yes? Yes, sorry, that is super fair. So if I'm doing this experience myself, I go up to the screen, I click a button, and it says, hi, or I don't remember what he actually says, but like, hi, tell me about somebody that influenced who you are today, right? If I plug my headphones in here, it'll start by saying, President Obama sits in a gray shirt on a blue background. He looks at the camera and says, I apologize, thank you for asking that question. So that's what a descriptive audio track is. It is intended to provide additional context that is available to you as a sighted visitor that may not be available to somebody who is not a sighted visitor and is just listening to the experience. That was a great question. Thank you for asking it. With me? Did we get it big? Okay, great. We made our way around. Okay, so what's interesting about this is that, so the contract of that becomes the only required behavior. So I want you to think through that experience we just talked about. What's happening here is a user-initiated play video. Now that circle should be on here. Either way, if this video is on the screen, I can tap play, or I can press the center button on that. And what that's going to do is it's going to emit a message to what is effectively campus-wide, and it's going to say, hey, this user tried to play a video. So we know that that video is in front somewhere, so we call that foregrounded. And our event broker is going to say, got it. If you have this video, go play tracks on your designated channels. Some of those are going to be audio descriptive, some of them are not. And each device is responsible now for handling its own set of side effects in response to that. So to be clear, each connected client can decide what it's going to do in addition to what it's already configured to do through that behavioral contract, or if you will, a social contract between the different devices, right? The interactive is going to likely choose, they don't have to, but the interactive is likely going to switch from the play icon to the pause icon. UXP doesn't care about that. It doesn't know. It doesn't have an icon, right? But the important part, the relationship and the behavioral contract between the, behavioral contract between the two entities is configured at the architectural level, as is the ability to decide who gets what messages. And that's what allows us allows for the device to not matter which one, because the event becomes, the event broker, the event bus, the pub subsystem, which is what I'm revealing here, becomes the mechanism for campus-wide distribution, and it is up to the individual device to decide what to do with it. So, how does that work? Raise your hand if you're familiar with pub sub. A handful, okay, cool. So the idea about PubSub is you have independent clients, independent states, but shared events. Events you can think of as literally just like JSON messages. Like they're not more complicated than that. It can be, they probably shouldn't be. So that's part, don't get me started. That's how we communicate, that's how we establish the bounds of the behavior and side effects that happen on each individual client side. There's an interesting side effect of a system like this, which is that if the connections between an interactive and the event broker, or the DSP, which is our audio signal processor, and the event broker go down, each independent entity is intentionally designed to be able to maintain its baseline functionality with any one of those connections being down, right? So part of what we're doing here is making not just failures independent, but it also becomes the job of each independent client to own its own reconciliation if it gets out of state. And so you get to what is effectively a self-healing system. Okay? Maybe? There we go. So the event system is not the brains of the operation. It exists only so that every participant in the system can make sure it honors the same behavioral contracts and semantic contracts. And that's what allows us to swap in devices. And if you're starting to get the impression that the event system is nevertheless an important part of the system, you would be correct. This is why we do a lot of containerization and a lot of container orchestration. At the core, down in the basement of the Obama Presidential Center, there's a set of computers whose only job is to ensure internal redundancies on a system like that, not just for the events, but for logging and telemetry and a whole bunch of other things that we could talk about. That would be a whole other talk. Right? So on site we have duplicated machines whose whole job is to do that. There's also a load balancer in front of it that allows us to manage failover in the event that any one of those systems goes down. So redundancy becomes key. This is a mural by Jules Julian on the 5th floor of the Obama Presidential Center. And the stations there allow visitors to interact with the mural that's in the background. It's the final installation that you see in the museum, and it invites visitors to kind of have a reflective experience. And so I'm going to land us here as well with a reflective question, circling back to what I asked you at the start. Which one is the exhibit? Is it the interactive? Is it the linear media? The tactile stations? Some other interface we haven't invented yet? They're all representations of it. And they're representations designed to endure. When we built the software platform for the Obama Presidential Center, we didn't build it for that electric Juneteenth day in Hyde Park. The exhibits will change. The stories will evolve. Visitor expectations will shift. New interfaces will be invented and designed. There will be moments where the platform is stretched beyond what we could have imagined, and we'll learn from those moments. We will refine it. We will expand it, because enduring technologies are not the ones that resist change. They don't put strict requirements on the details of the implementation, nor confine actors within the system. They represent the relationships and rules and behavior, and preserve only what must remain true. They're the ones who know where change belongs. Everything else is left to the people who inherit them. I'm Diana. Thank you so much for having me. I will take questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Diana. That was an awesome presentation. Your ability to distill communication down to its essence of language and then be able to show it in a multi-sensory, multimodal experience was something that invigorated me to watch that. So that was awesome. Open questions.
I don't think I'm picking. Somebody, yeah.
Hi. Two questions real quick. The same one. How much of this can default back to some format like DAISY, for example, or something like they could feed into a Braille display if somebody's carrying around a Braille display with them, like a Braille note or something like that, or even a government standard talking book player, just to be extreme about it. I mean, this is sounds like a very local, specific setup. How much of this is something you can represent in something like SGML or even DAISY, to be more specific, something that's more universal?
Yeah. So the UXP device is part of the reason we worked with Prime Access Consulting, is that the UXP device was a bespoke device built for use cases that extend beyond the Obama Presidential Center. And the intention at the very start of this project was to allow you to do things like attach standard Braille interpreters or other forms of assistive tools, certain types of game controllers, etc. There are still plans for that technology to be iterated upon such that it can get to a place where it is a little bit more generically available, and the technologies that we have here can be packaged and scaled in a slightly different way. So it is the idea, but that will be continuous iteration on the UXP device itself, rather than necessarily iterations on the content structure and the behavioral architecture of the museum. Does that make sense? Or does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's so... Okay, well, I'll wait and see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think, yes.
Wow, what a talk. Really exciting. I am curious how you all are thinking about the artwork across the building, because I understand that some of it is in the exhibits, a lot of it is in the building.
Correct.
How does the interpretive work with these art pieces? Are people able to engage with that?
Yeah, so there's a great New York Times article called "The Audacity of Art at the Obama Presidential Center," which I think is partly what you're referring to. The art is really considered a separate entity from the museum installations. There are a handful of art pieces that were made, like, so for example, the Jules Julian mural. There are some examples of that are really, like, truly and sincerely art that are within the exhibits. That is not the vast majority of cases. There is one exception to that in the Sky Room on the 8th floor of the museum. There is one art installation that was intentionally paired with certain types of sound effects and sonification. And in that case, there is going to be a UXP up there. But broadly speaking, we have now, there's certainly room to integrate with the physical art that's throughout the campus. That is not where we have focused currently.
So if I'm otherwise enabled,
Sure.
and I walk into the museum, how am I going to know that I plug my headphones into that and I get descriptive audio?
Yeah. It's a great question. You are hitting on something that we are still working on iterating in the real space. So there are a couple things to consider here. The first is that I'm going to say something that is just a statement of fact, not necessarily a representation of something that I think should be true. It is a statement of fact that largely folks who have a variety of disabilities or access needs tend to plan ahead. And so because of that, we have a lot of that information on the website as far as like what the UXP is, how to use it. There are also signs throughout the museum around get a headset. Do you want to use this assistive technology? Get a set of headphones from our visitor experience folks. There is work to be done on on providing the kind of documentation that allows for wider adoption of a tool like this, because it's not just ultimately meant for people with low vision. The idea is also that if you are somebody with mobility or dexterity issues and then the touch screen is not working for you, you should be able to use it for that capacity too. Getting that messaging right has proven tricky, and it's not something we're done doing, but you're right to point out that it's a new technology, and so somebody has to tell people that it's there and what it's for.
Hi.
Hi.
On the product problem of being stewards of visitor trust.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you handle visitor data when you enter the space, especially with all the interactive exhibits. Yes. So, I mean, obviously the Obama Center is such a high profile space. I was just wondering how you handle that.
Yeah. So we intentionally limit the kinds of things users can provide about themselves on
no
the
PII or anything.
Well, there's one exception. So the vast we largely avoid it. There is an exception. There are two exceptions within the museum. One is the story booth experience, and the story booth experience has a lengthy legal disclaimer, frankly, that says if you were okay with this and you want to fill out this form, and you don't have to fill out this form, but if you do, here's the things that will happen. So we do have those instances. We intentionally limit them because there's just no reason to take on additional risk if it's not truly necessary. The one other exception is we have the opportunity for people to put their names on the murals, and we have a fairly robust model running that screens out a variety of things like, I'll give you a plain example. Seymour, S-E-Y-M-O-U-R, Butts, B-U-T-T-S, is like a good example, right. So like it screens out things like that are intentional. So we can't, if you choose to put your name on the wall, it's there. So, but that is the choice we make. So we are intentional about like avoiding there's no reason to take on any data that could potentially be problematic or harmful unless we really, really need to. We have none of our software relies on that. Now there has been talk of doing that. We have a pretty strict policy on what we can and can't collect. Our default position is I don't want it. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to know. Our ticketing is off as well. We don't own the because it's just a level of risk that unless we need to take it, we're very careful about how we choose to take on that risk and where to put that energy. So it's a good question.
Hi,
Yes,
thanks
hi.
again for an awesome talk.
Thanks.
I have two questions, and whichever one feels more fun for you to answer.
Sure.
One thing is very nerdy, which I'm just thinking about whatever the CMS is that manages all these different systems and where the delineations are between how much of that is controlled as infrastructure in the code versus having folks who are maybe less technical being able to manage it, but it seems like there's 20 different attributes for each thing that needs to be kept in sync. And the other question I have is all of the work that's done into kind of make these distributed pieces of the same exhibit, to me, especially also as a web developer, I'm so it would actually be very easy to make a virtual version of the Obama Center that anyone could visit, and maybe will that happen?
So, are you trying to get me in trouble?
No,
So
and I'm specifically not trying to get you in trouble, which is why you can answer
so
either question.
no. I know you're not. So your inference is correct, and I'm going to now speak as a member of the product and technology team, not a representation of the foundation as a whole. That is our obvious next step, right? There's a lot of interest in the story booth experience and trying to figure out how to make a website version of that so people can upload their own videos and send them to Obama. And so within that, are a lot of questions about user privacy. There are a lot of, so you are correct that the payoff of architectural decisions that are costly up front is that a pivot like that is very much within our wheelhouse. Now, separately, there's a conversation about which part and what goes on the museum website and what is it a separate thing you have to pay for? That's a whole other conversation that is frankly above my pay grade. But you're right. As far as the CMS, I'm laughing because let me. CMSs are tricky. Getting other so here. Let me know. I'm gonna put it this way. We built CMSs before the people whose job it was to use the CMS had been identified. Because that's just the nature of the game. This particularly comes up when it comes to like digital signage. There are things that had to be in place for the opening of the Presidential Center. And that means that sometimes, as the technologist, our job is to say, okay, so if you don't know, we're going to give you this. And then you'll have to tell us what you think. That requires operating a bit of an agile mode that an organization like the Barack Obama Foundation is not accustomed to. It is an organization born in the depths of the White House, and there are many remnants of that. So it is an agile thing that we're working on. There are several CMSs. There are several users of that CMS. Some of them have access to edit more than they should. Some of them should be able to access. That's an ongoing thing. But those are exactly the questions that we ask.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. So my question is, now that it's been open to the public and in a way like in its current status, do you have a favorite exhibit or one that was the most interesting to sort of translate, as you discussed, into a representation?
Oh, okay. So those are two different questions. Yes. So I have technically my favorite exhibit from like a technical challenge standpoint, and then my real favorite is the mural. The mural is really beautiful. It's really, frankly, like well done, in the communication between the kiosks and the mural is pretty smooth, and people seem to like it a lot. Separately, there is an instance where we have, it's called the First Digital Presidency, and there's an instance where we have a UXP that is attached to a linear media, and in front of it, there are 3 tactiles in display cases that can light up at different parts throughout the museum. Or I'm sorry, throughout the film that you're seeing on the linear media, which brought with it a set of challenges we haven't actually fully solved yet, but it's a really interesting one because in all the instances I showed you earlier, the linear media, you have 2 options. You can get the standard descriptive track, the standard audio or the audio descriptive track. In a case like this, you should be able to get the standard audio, the descriptive track, or mute those so that you can hear the guided tactile descriptions of the things in front of it, which is just like an architecturally different thing, and it became kind of an outlier. But that's a fun one from a technical standpoint. Oh gosh, you're quizzing me. 4, I believe? 4. I believe it's on the... Yeah, I believe it's on the 4th floor. I might have a photo of it. We'll deal with that separately. But yeah. It's up against the wall, by where there's like a big round square room that's all projections. It's right by that. Yeah.
Hi.
Yes.
So, for the individual artists and designers that were creating the specific exhibition pieces themselves, were they like brought in on this process, like about UXPs or whatever it was called, and like how much, or maybe different artists had different levels of participation and kind of planning for these systems, or maybe they just weren't bothered about it at all. I'm curious.
I know the answer, and I will be diplomatic. We worked with a variety of folks who were involved at different parts of graphic production, exhibit production, and they had varying levels of technical familiarity with the kinds of things that we had to stand up in order to make a museum like this run. And varying levels of familiarity means varying levels of conformity to the contracts and behavioral requirements that we have set out. Separately, there is a very real problem associated with trying to do this in a museum space, because as recently as January of this year, we were still editing exhibits. And so what that means is that we had to make a series of guesses that we hoped were right and hand them to the people building these exhibits, and then every so often be like, hey, so we're going to switch a thing, and they didn't always like that. It is not how people who build museums are typically accustomed to working. Museum development is an extraordinarily waterfall process. I'm talking like 2021, we have several conversations about like, what even is this exhibit really? And you know, we have like a series of iterations and wireframes, and nobody touches any code, reviews anything until the wireframes have gone through like 3 different sets of approvals. That is just not how software engineers are accustomed to working. And it just brings with it its own set of kind of operational challenges. Does that answer your question? Yeah. The artists and designers didn't know about this. Yeah. It became mostly our job for them to not have to worry about it too much. Like if we did our job well, it's mostly behind the scenes and they don't need to care about it. There have been exceptions to that, particularly as experiences change or we add new what we refer to as event schemas or content schemas that change something about the way they're working on something they're working on.
There's a question from the live stream. Can you talk more about the independent, how did your team think of eliminating redundancies when every system is responsible for its own failures?
Well, we didn't eliminate redundancies. We intentionally put in a lot of them. So that was part of it. So I can get at the first part of the question for sure, which is how we think about a very basic operational level, things like health checks, health check endpoints that allow us to even figure out what, and designing those health check endpoints appropriately. We also make heavy use of like localized machines per floor. So part of that failover, part of that system-wide failover allows us to like assume that the network is gone as well. So a lot of these applications, including the UXP, including the interactives, and some parts of the audio systems are intentionally built to have some amount of space available on disk for a lot of these kinds of failover case caching. Or caching and restoration so we use a lot of containerized images as well. And so we have a system for identifying which semantic versioning tag is out on any one device and switching which semver that is as we need to. And so that's related to kind of how we think about deployment of different versions and how we get different versions on. But fundamentally, at the core of that question is that we have a set of computers whose job it is to monitor every health check that exists in the museum, find which load balancer is in front of it, and ensure that those services are communicating the way they need to. And that sometimes means going back to like a fault. We don't typically go back to like a tertiary fallback. That's not something that happens a lot, or at all, really. But it's something we could do because we have containerized everything.
How much AI and automation is being utilized within your system?
I knew a question about AI was coming. So to answer your question directly, there is no AI. That's the answer. That I will. There is no AI. There will not be any AI within the foundation. Now, I will say there are individual. AI is happening, right? AI is happening. It is happening at a social level. It is happening. There's nothing we can do to change that. However, while there are individual folks at the foundation who choose to make use of AI for any number of their own personal reasons, AI is not advanced enough yet, or will never be advanced enough to be able to operate on like a values level that the foundation operates on. And so reasonable people within the foundation disagree on and can and will continue to, because this is an ever evolving area. But by and large, there is no AI. There will never be AI, at least not in our software, unless we were to choose to build our own for some reason. Right, so there, now, let me be clear, I am not committing to anything publicly here. But there are theoretically, the only way you could even theoretically get at an AI-driven solution would have to be human in the loop. Because so much of what we care about really isn't semantic, it is values. It is what is about community and what is success and what is failure. And those are simply just not the kinds of things you're going to get out from a fully automated system. That being said, like theoretically, there is a world in which we could do that, but as the, it could, we just don't. So I think often the question about should we use AI to do this, or this being anything, should we use AI to help with reconciliation and fallback or failover? And the answer is often you could, but you could also do it without that. So we've managed the configuration of something like failover could be managed by AI, but it doesn't have to be because we own the rules. And so we can just decide what the conditions of failover are. I know that there are some companies that are using, or that are like hiring companies to bring in AI to do penetration testing. Theoretically, that's something that maybe we could do, but again, the technology just isn't there yet. And so long as I am involved in the decision making at the foundation, the museum will not have AI. It is also not in line with, I think, how the president thinks about what the museum is. The museum is not intended to be a space where you engage with the technology. The museum is intended to be a space where you gather and experience stories and experience history. And if you can find a good use case for AI within that, I'm all ears, but there isn't one right now. No, true, that's what I mean. Like, but so like, so far, most of what AI could do for us is things that we already do, and adding AI to it would remove a level of observability from it. And so we need that level of being able to understand why it's integrated, and so it's just easier. We don't need it. It doesn't give us something that we can't take on our own.
Yeah.
Yes.
More of a simple one. Something I was thinking about is that there's like the audio assistive track, and then there's the regular audio track.
Yep.
But you probably have multiple people in a space simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So like if I have my headphones plugged in, I've picked the audio assistive track. Are the speakers in the space still playing the regular audio track? Or like if you had a group of people, how would that work with that engagement?
They are, and they are still, sorry, to more completely answer the question. The question was, if you're listening to the audio descriptive track, is the person next to you who's also using a similar station also hearing the audio descriptive track? The answer is no, and the solution to that comes back to why things are local. Right? So I want you to imagine, since you asked the question, imagine you and I are standing next to each other, and the video that I was, hi, something, that's the president, I don't remember what he says in the video, but he says, hi, insert something about Michelle. I don't know. And at the same time, you are watching the same video. If there is even a beat, if you've got headphones in and I don't, if there is even a beat, like a couple milliseconds of a delay, your experience has just fundamentally been ruined. Because you are hearing, the president sits at a blue screen, right? You're hearing that, and if the audio when he starts speaking is not at exactly the same rate as where you are, it's an echo, and it's a really uncomfortable experience. So the answer is yes, the audio descriptive tracks come out of headphone jacks almost exclusively. And that is what allows you to be able to hear the audio descriptive kind of over the standard audio, which augments that audio experience.
So then there's like speakers in a room that still be playing this.
Regular, yes.
One more question for the live stream.
Yeah.
Do you have any web theory or information architecture book recommendations? I liked your thought pipeline about how HTML isn't a web language or how browsers are interpreters.
That is an excellent question that I was not prepared for. I've got book recommendations in general. I don't have one. That through line came largely from me looking back and thinking, what is the message here to prevent this from being a talk about database schemas and event structures? So that is where that metaphor came in. As far as book recommendations, I just inhaled Project Hail Mary. Anyone? Inhaled, just immediate. I'm spent. I also did just read Children of Blood and Bone. I have a lot to say about that. Children of Blood and Bone. I have a lot to say. There's a lot of tea for those of you who don't know. I love a scandal. For those, yeah, I love a scandal. But yes, Inhaled, Project Hail Mary. If you like any version of sci-fi or survival or dystopian, you should pick up that book immediately. That is, I'm sorry to whoever asked that for that. I don't have a better answer. But I will say most of my reading is fiction.
One more
Yes.
question.
I could ask a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I recall, you did a presentation about a year ago here. Is that correct?
3 years ago.
3
But
years ago?
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
my question is, from the presentation you made then to the presentation you made today, you have released a nationally, internationally televised event, pretty much. What does it feel like to get to this end state?
Is it the end?
Well, to this milestone. To this milestone. Yeah.
One of my good friends on my team said it best. I am deliriously proud of what we have pulled off. Thank you. I will also say it is not lost on me as a native Chicagoan. It is not lost on me what it means to pull off something of this scale as a black woman leading that team. And I'll be honest, I didn't know if we were going to be able to pull this off. We had, you saw kind of the logic here. We had an idea of what we thought would work, and it really is just getting a bunch of people in a room and saying, well, we think this will work, let's give it a shot. It is an honor and a privilege, particularly as a Chicagoan, to see the city show up en masse. This is my city. I grew up here. Had a 312 area code as a kid. Still do. And so, yeah, I guess I'll end it there. I am deliriously proud of us. I am proud of the team. You know, I come here representing a large team of engineers who did this work. And it's easy to, we spent some time as a team looking back on all of this and to have gotten to a state, not just, I'll leave it here, but you know, President Obama has been repeatedly scarred by healthcare.gov. For the first couple of years, we had a running joke. We still do, actually. We have a counter of number of days since the last mention of healthcare.gov. And it became the job of the product and technology team to establish that kind of trust again across the foundation. And one of the small wins was that at opening, at no point did anybody say, is it going to go down? Is it going to work? And that is a reflection of us having done a lot of work over several years to build systems that people trust. And that is the work of an engineer. And to do that and bring it into a space that feels like home that's the dream. That's the dream. Thank you so much.